Our second scripture comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verses 38 to 44. As he taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearances say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." Every year comes about this time of the year, and I have to say it is one of the most uncomfortable church times for me. Stewardship. Now, if I'm going to be truthful, I'm less uncomfortable about it than I used to be, but it still makes me feel a little... Now, it's true, there are some people out there who actually enjoy asking for money. Some of them are simply pathological, and they do it as a way of getting. And they do that piece, some of them in that pathological way, very well. But there are others who do it well because they see the way the world works. And they feel as if asking people for money is really a wonderful thing to do because there are good causes out there. There are good things to be done, and it all takes money. And moving money from one person to those causes is a good thing to do. And so they're able to do that and do that very well. Unfortunately, it's been one of those times when we've had lots of that going on, hasn't it? Those folk have been busy for months. Now, we find ourselves in different places in life, but one of the things that's been happening for me over the last 3 or 4 months is I have gotten maybe 4, 5, 15 requests for money from some political cause every single day by email. I literally go into that section of my emails and I delete at least 50 emails a day. Not all asking for money, but many of them. And then something else switches, and right about now we're beginning to see those things coming saying, "Wouldn't you like to give to this charity? It is Christmas time. It's coming to the end of the year and lots of people are feeling generous." And so we get more and more of those. And then a few Sundays ago, Nancy was going around handing people letters. The budget committee had been at work. They've been crunching numbers. They've been projecting costs. They've been imagining what our income might look like, and they put all of that in the form of a budget and a letter. And tied to that, every year there comes at least one sermon about giving. And perhaps it isn't a coincidence that the passage that I read appears in the lectionary. The lectionary was put together by church people, and I'll bet a bunch of them were thinking, it's right about here in the church year, when churches are putting together budgets, let's pick a passage that has to do with giving. Now, we're kind of casual about all of this. There are churches that are anything but. And I'll bet this church used to be less casual about it. There are companies that do nothing but put together stewardship campaigns that they sell to churches. And most of us, if we've been in church for any length of time, have been part of one of those. Maybe there was a committee that was put together, and each person in the committee had an assignment to visit some members of the church, and every church member got a knock on their door, and someone came with papers, and they sat down and they said, "This is what you gave last year, and this is what you gave the year before, and look at how our budget struggled this year. Wouldn't you like to give more next year?" And then there was a program that went around for a while, and I think this church probably did it. They called it the Pony Express. And in that, you got a packet of materials, and someone brought it to your house, and they went over it with you, and they asked you to make a pledge, and then they handed you the package, and you were expected to go and sell it to the next person on the list. Boy, talk about making people uncomfortable. I've never felt really good about asking for money. Even though, again, I've gotten to the place in my life where I can see that there are positive things that people need to ask for money because, and people are happy to give often when it's just something that's worthwhile. But I still feel some discomfort about it. I can preach about politics. Some of you have told me I preach too much about politics. I can preach about sex. Probably haven't preached enough about that. I can preach about religion. Duh. Money, that feels too personal to me. Too personal. And indeed it is personal because it's been rightly said that if you want to know what somebody really values, all you have to do is look at their checkbook. If you want to know what a nation truly values, all you have to do is look at their budget. If you want to know what an institution finds important, just look at the budget, and that tells you. I've read, and I'm not going to swear that it's true, but it feels right, that 1 of 7 verses out of the mouth of Jesus has to do with money. Again, I won't swear to it. But it feels right to me as I read the Bible. Because how we deal with money is a window into our souls. And so I do preach about money when it comes up in the lectionary, and unfortunately it often aligns with budget time. Perhaps it would be easier to preach about money if it happened at some other point in the church's year, because then it wouldn't feel quite so immediate. And you would be able to listen to me without wondering, does he have an ulterior motive here? Is he really hoping to get a raise? And I've read more than one commentary on some of those passages where Jesus talks about money, where the commentator will say, honestly and accurately, you can tell when Jesus says this that he's not trying to raise a church budget. If he was, he'd probably pay more attention to the big givers and the big gifts. So I want to get one piece out of the way right now. It is church budget time. Your pledge is important for next year. Your giving is critical. If we don't put checks in the offering basket or send them to the church office, it doesn't work. It's pretty simple. This church makes a difference in this community, and it makes a difference in each of our lives. So it's worthy of commitment. It's worthy of praying about and thinking about and struggling with what is an accurate reflection of my sense of God's blessings through this institution. And so I hope for each of us here that to the degree that Cambridge Drive Community Church is important to us, that is reflected in our giving. Okay, I got that piece all out of the way. Now I want to go to the story of the Scripture. And hopefully you can do it without quite as much baggage. It was a day like any other. Jesus went to the temple to teach. And as he was talking about the condition of people's hearts. And he said, it's never enough just to do the right thing. We have to do the right thing for the right reasons. Now, he never says, don't do the right thing. But he says, do it for the right reasons. Beware of those who like to be seen doing the right thing, but then turn around and steal the widow's house. Now, the practice at that time was not unlike what happens in some African American churches, where when people give, they lined up and there was a big barrel. And they would line up and they would walk up and place their offering in that. And as they did that, there was a priest who watched. Maybe everybody else watched too. And when someone put a particularly large gift in there, they would say, hey, everybody, look what Joan just gave. Or, if it was a really big one, they'd blow a trumpet because they wanted to be sure everybody heard. So when Charlie came up, dun, 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 you'll notice Charlie's left, so I could do that. Everyone could see. Everyone could hear. If you were concerned at all about your public image, about recognition by the larger community that you were doing the right thing, it was a perfect recipe. It was a perfect recipe. If your gift was large enough, everybody heard. And some of those people who gave big gifts did so sincerely. Some looked at their resources and they knew that God had blessed them. They felt like they had fallen into something wonderful. You know, we used to say about Alexis that if she stepped in horse manure, she would turn around and say, "Where's my pony?" They felt like that in life. They felt like that in life. And so they gave. And they gave because they wanted to make a difference. There were those people there at the time of Jesus, just like there are those kinds of folk now who give sincerely, regardless of the fact that they're crazy rich. There were some folk who had mixed motives. They wanted to do good things, they wanted to make things right, but boy, it sure felt good to have the recognition for it too. And if they could get a tax write-off in addition, made it all worthwhile. There were those folk. But then, as Jesus watched, there was another category of people who really didn't care about doing the right thing, about doing something good. All they cared about was that by doing that, they looked better in the world. You know, we've all seen those politicians, those celebrities, who just want to be associated with a good cause because it ups their brand. And there were those folk. It was a public relations ploy, and the cost for their advertisement of their brand was simply whatever they were giving that day. And you can bet as they gave, that question was central. Is it worth me giving this much for the public relations bonus I get at the end? And they went to that point and no further. Those were the folk that Jesus was condemning. And as he was watching them, this elderly widow came to the front of the line and she dropped her small gift in. We're told 2 small coins equal to a penny. Now, it was a difficult thing for her to do because people were watching. People were watching. They might hear the sound of 2 tiny coins hitting the sides of that metal barrel as they tinkle their way down. How many times have we heard, "Oh yeah, we want people to put money on the plate, but we don't want to hear it." We don't want to hear it. In old days, they used to put a little fabric thing down in the bottom to keep it from hearing it. Now, I don't know if they're still there or not. Maybe not. She looked at those 2 coins and she knew that it wasn't enough to make a difference. She was in line there at the temple. She could look around. She saw this amazing, this gorgeous building. She was smart enough to know what maintenance costs were. She saw as the staff where they're running back and forth and doing all of the things they do. She saw the priests in their fancy robes, and she knew that they had gone to school for years so that they could be there and do what they were supposed to do, and they put all of these resources into them. And then she saw the musicians, and she knew the years of practice and lessons and the hard work that it took for Jessica to play along with that drum machine. And they knew that, and she saw all of that, and she thought, this place costs a lot of money. And then she looked outside and she saw, man, trying to keep up with those grounds. Can you imagine that? And there's no water. Everything's dying, and you gotta cut down trees, and you gotta move. It's just so much to be done. And she saw all of that. And then she thought, and not only that, but this temple does work in the community. And this temple sends money to mission causes all around the world, and there's so much need and so much to be done, and they're trying to address it, and I've got 2 coins worth a penny. It's not even a drop in the bucket. And I can see her shaking her head as she imagines all of that and realizes this simply doesn't make a difference. Not at all. And it would have been easy for her to rationalize. Why should I embarrass myself? Why should I go up there when the only possible result is either nothing happens because I put my 2 coins in there, or worse than that, people laugh at me. She can imagine the priests pushing her away. Come on, hurry up, old woman, so that these people with real money can get up to the front of the line. She can imagine the counters afterwards sitting in the church office with the money in front of them going, oh man, who gave pennies again? And having to count them. But the line was moving slow that day. So she also remembered her blessings. She remembered the joy of being a small child, and running and playing and feeling the fresh air. She remembered the joy of new love when she first got engaged. And she had this dream of what her life would look like. She remembered the joy of, after that hard work and that pain, feeling that baby in her arms for the first time. And feeling love that she had never imagined possible before. And everything changed in that moment. She remembered when that child moved out of the house, and the mixture of joy and pain and anticipation and fear. She remembered that first day in temple after her spouse had died, and how empty she felt, and how she didn't imagine how she could possibly go on another day, and how even worship didn't feel right because there was somebody not there. And through all of that, as she looked back over her life, she knew that God had been with her. She knew it, and she felt it. And she knew that even when she couldn't feel it at the time, she could see it when she looked back. And she looked down at those 2 small coins again, and she shook her head, and she thought, it's the best I can do. It's all I can do, literally. And so it's what I'm going to do. And it doesn't matter if they laugh. It doesn't matter if they snicker. It doesn't matter if the priest pushes me to get me out of the way so that someone with real money can get here. And she dropped her 2 coins in. Maybe the priest did push her out of the way. Maybe people did laugh. Maybe the counters did grumble that day. But Jesus looked at that and he saw something different. He saw a woman who gave the very best she could. And when comparing that to the others, she gave more because she gave the best she could and they gave out of what was left over. In worldly terms, it wasn't enough. In worldly terms, it didn't make any difference at all. But in God's kingdom, it was the biggest gift of the day. And God would use it. And God would do what only God can do. Because she gave her best. And as a result, Jesus looked at that and he said to his disciples and to the writers of the Gospels and Mark to his church and continuing to us, this is a woman y'all should emulate. Now, the passage is clearly about money. But it's also about more than that. Because money, as I said, is always a window to our soul. It is a metaphor for life. She did her best, knowing it wasn't enough, trusting that God would then do what only God can do. Now, I don't know about you, but I often feel as if my best is not enough. I often feel that my best, even when I feel like, I'm pretty good at that, it's still not enough to make a difference. I look at this little church, and I am completely and absolutely honest with you when I tell you if I was moving into this community and picking a church, this would be the one I would pick. It is that simple. It wouldn't take me any time to figure that out. Because this church is doing important work and has done important work, has a place in this community that truly, if this church disappeared, people may not know why they were noticing what they were noticing, but things would be different. And I look at that and I think, am I really doing a good enough job as a pastor? Because there's a couple empty seats. The budget is tight, stretched. The property, we've got folk who do a lot of work here to keep things moving, make things nice. But there's a lot left to be done. There's a lot to be done that, I certainly wouldn't dare ask Greg and Joe and Charlie to do. The surrounding community has needs that aren't even being addressed by anybody. And we live in one of those places where people have enough money and enough comfort that they can close that off so you don't necessarily see what the needs are, but they're there. And we know they're there because we have them. And I look at all of that and I think, even when I do my very best, it's not quite enough. And then we look at the bigger picture. Our society, I saw different numbers this week, some larger. The smallest number I saw was that the shooting at the club in Thousand Oaks was the 307th mass shooting this year. That's basically one a day. Racism, sexism, xenophobia, fear are all growing. The economy seems good, but there are clearly folk who are being left out, and it doesn't feel fair, and it doesn't feel secure, at least not to me. I find myself always waiting for the other shoe to drop. We learned this week, Corwin, in his transitional kindergarten, was having an active shooter drill. It's not something that should happen. My Jewish friends, my black friends, my Latino friends, my LGBTQ friends tell me that they don't feel safe. And here I am, middle-class white man, and I kind of shake my head and say, I hear you. It's not my experience. They don't feel safe. And we hear more fires and more problems. The climate continues to change, and that is scary. And even the institution of the church is falling apart. As young folk flee what they have to say, accurately see as hypocrisy, at least in large portions of the church. And all of those things feel like they are beyond our ability to address, at least as individuals. A single vote. Being aware of being a little more energy efficient and putting an LED bulb instead of an incandescent one. Changing my lifestyle a little bit so I eat a little less beef. Being woke. Trying to be a faithful follower of Jesus. None of that feels like it's a drop in the bucket. Not even a drop in the bucket. And the temptation for me, maybe for you, is to throw in the towel and give up. To feel like that woman standing in line in the temple and looking at my 2 coins and saying, it doesn't make a difference. Why bother? She gave a small gift. Too small for a real impact in the budget. But Jesus saw her faithfulness. And God does what God can do. And I know what church budgets look like. I look at those things as money comes in and goes out, and I worry about those things. But I know, and so I know God really does require large sums of money. But I also know that God blesses and uses those small contributions. And those times when our contributions seem small, and indeed even when they are small, our contributions of money, of time, of talent, of commitment, when those are given with sincerity from our hearts, Jesus sees. And God then does what only God can do. And God does not depend on us at that point. And the kingdom of God comes. The kingdom of God comes. And so, when we look at ourselves and we feel like we're not enough, let us be aware that God looks at the intent of our hearts. That God looks at our commitment. That God looks at what we bring, not with the question of whether or not is enough to make a difference out there, but whether it reflects the difference in here. And when it does that, it makes all the difference.